All right, folks, and we are back to Unit 4. I am once again joined, I'm, by the way, your lead pastor, Ben Kempfer, at Downtown Community Church, which is always an honor. And I am here with my stupendous, selfless, self-reflecting, self-aware, but not self-consumed co-host, the Grace Markwell.
It gets worse every time. But welcome back, everyone. We are on Unit 4 today, which means we are covering Moses. We've made a pretty big jump from Abraham to Moses. So Ben, will you catch us up what has happened between these two guys?
Yeah, so tons of stuff that drops in between Abraham and Moses. So Abraham has a son named Isaac, and you might remember Abraham and Isaac from the whole, sacrifice scene or lack thereof. So Isaac has a son whose name's Jacob, and this is kind of an interesting thing. So Jacob is actually renamed Israel. So you heard like the Israelites, the nation of Israel. Jacob was renamed Israel. Mm-hmm. Jacob had 12 sons, okay? Each of those sons kind of became representative of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Similar to kind of like how we, in the colonial United States, we had 13 colonies. They had 12 tribes. Pretty different, but, similar kind of idea and framework and number. So of Israel, a.k.a. Jacob's son, is one of his youngest sons named Joseph. So Joseph has this crazy story, takes up a number of different chapters in the book of Genesis, where he ends up, through a crazy set of events in Egyptian slavery. He is tremendously helpful as averting a plague and saving up and interpreting dreams, a bunch of stuff like that. Eventually, the people of Abraham become so populated in Egypt, where he is, that they get kind of worried, and then they start to make him into slaves. So the Israelites spent about 400 years in slavery in Egypt. Now, again, Joseph helped, but that helping, as they began to populate, they said, oh no, might get overthrown. Mm-hmm. Enslavement happens, population just kind of like explodes. And so then God kind of sees this person, Moses, as the nation of Israel is praying in Egypt, and raises up this leader, Moses. Moses, wild story, mm-hmm. Similar. He sees somebody being killed. He runs into the desert. Well, actually, he kills. He runs into the desert. He sees a burning bush. He says, after 40 years or so, he sees a burning bush. Mm-hmm. Says, let my people go to Pharaoh. Pharaoh says no. 10 plagues happen. Eventually, Pharaoh says yes. They go into some of the desert, into this place eventually called Mount Sinai. Now, I am recapping a whole lot of Bible there, so there's obviously a ton of story that's in between that. But where we're dropping in is before they reach the Promised Land. He didn't just say go in the desert, right? It was go through this desert to get to the Promised Land. While they're kind of tracking towards that, they stop at this place called Mount Sinai, which is where we get the law and the 10 Commandments. So that's kind of where we're dropping in today. So it was recap: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, a.k.a. Israel, 12 sons, Joseph towards Egypt, enslaved the nation of Israel, Moses, leader about 400 years later that's raised up, delivers. They're now in the desert, post-Egypt, at this Mount Sinai, and about to receive the law. So a lot of stuff, but Grace, will you help to connect? Okay, now what are we actually going to read this week?
Yes. So that is a lot of stuff, and I think it's also important to note that this promised land that they were heading towards, that is part of the promise that we read about with Abraham. And so they had been expecting this, of like, where the heck is this promised land? And they are now heading there. But this is where we're going to pick up today. So we're going to read a couple of chapters in Exodus. There's some extra ones listed that I would super encourage you to read. But basically where we're picking up is God making a new covenant with Moses. And so this covenant is a little bit different than the one with Abraham because it is conditional. If we remember, the one with Abraham was unconditional. He was saying that all of the promises he was making to Abraham rested only on his faithfulness. And God is still saying, hey, my relationship with you, still intact. That is still on me. But now there are blessings that are going to be part of this covenant, but those are conditional on your obedience to the law that I'm about to give you. And so the Israelites had a part to play in this one. Those blessings were dependent on whether or not they obeyed. And so a lot of the law is outlined in these chapters that we're going to have you guys read today, but there's a lot more that comes after that. It goes into Leviticus, and I know what you're thinking. You don't want to read Leviticus. Leviticus changed my life, so I would encourage you to read that if you never have. But yeah, we start to see the law develop. And so, Ben, do you have anything to say on
Well, no, I think that's
the
awesome.
law?
I think that the cool things, and we talked about this a little bit before, but about the law is obviously there's like multiple functions and purposes of it, right?
Yeah.
But the reason we want you to read through it is because we want you to like just get a small taste of how robust and detailed and weighty this law was. Basically, how impossible it is to be good enough to be good with God.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say it's interesting is within this covenant, right? It's a progression of covenant, right? It's kind of like an expansion of it. And so one way to think about this is not necessarily God's making a brand new relationship so much as this is an additional component that doesn't nullify, but it expands the awareness of what this relationship and the dynamic looks like.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. And so then we'll go on and read the next day in Jeremiah 31. And so this is, again, another prophet. That's what we're doing on the second day. And this is God promising through the prophet Jeremiah that one day there will be a new covenant where the law is no longer written on stone, which is what it gets written on with Moses. And it's no longer this thing that they have to live up to. The law will then be written on people's hearts, and they will be motivated to follow and to obey the Lord because of what he has done on the inside, not just because of what something is on the outside. And then the next day we go on to Hebrews 8, so post-Jesus, and the writer of Hebrews quotes pretty much that whole passage from Jeremiah and points to the fact that that new covenant is now in place through Jesus. And this new covenant is better than the old one because we no longer have that impossible standard to live up to, and we have this ultimate high priest, Jesus, and Exodus gets a lot into that priestly stuff, but we have this ultimate high priest who offered the ultimate sacrifice and established that new covenant where the law is now on our hearts, not just outside of us.
Yeah, and what I think is cool about this is, again, you see the relational progression. You see God expanding the relationship. You see in Jeremiah how he says this is what's going to happen next in the relationship. And now in the fulfillment of Easter or the death and resurrection, right, now we understand, oh, this is what this new relationship, this new covenant looks like. And so, again, this was the plan of God. This was the intricate intention of God to draw his people to him as a relationship with a sinful group like we are. And thank God he did.
Yeah.
So excited for you. Dig in. We'll be back in a few days with Unit 5.